organizer of this event, for allowing me to share my experiences in Kyrgyzstan and to relive my Kyrgyzstan days. Now, a question that people may ask is, what was a professor of Chinese doing in Kyrgyzstan? It's a very natural question, right? So going to Kyrgyzstan actually has been a lifelong dream for various reasons. I have had a decades-long actually interest in the Dongans of Central Asia and their language, which is a Chinese dialect not written in Chinese characters. And also I grew up near Central Asia in Urumqi, Xinjiang, Northwest China, and lived among the Hui Dongan people in Xinjiang for a year after high school. And also I've been fascinated by Russian, which is widely used in Central Asia. And thanks to a Fulbright Research Award on September the 5th, 2021, I finally landed in Kyrgyzstan. And today I'll be mainly talking, my talk has two parts, Dongans and the Dongan language, and then some pages from my Central Asian diary. So I first came to know about the Dongans in the early 80s while researching for a class on language contact taught by Dr. Lahist, a well-renowned Estonian-American phonetician at Ohio State University. A series of publications by Svetlana Rimsky-Korsakov had me totally intrigued. A Chinese language written phonetically? A granddaughter of the Russian composer Rimsky-Korsakov of Shahrazad fame, Svetlana was born in Harbin, China, and grew up in Beijing. She speaks Russian, Chinese, and English. For the last 40 years, my interest in Dongan has not waned. On the right, you see a picture with Abakir, one of the two Dongan brothers visiting San Diego in the early 90s. The brothers got me an audio recording by Dongan scholars at the Kyrgyz Academy of Sciences and the fax copy of the Dongan newspaper, 10月底期, October Banner. October here obviously refers to the October Revolution. And some Dongan materials from the late Professor Hashimoto, who is seen in the middle of the picture here, a Japanese scholar of Chinese dialects, came into my possession. Some history. The first Dongans fled from Northwest China in 1878 after a failed Muslim uprising. So they came from Shanxi and Gansu provinces, yeah. And the leader was a Shanxi soldier by the name of Bayan Hu. And the Dongans mostly settled along the Chui River and the Kyrgyzstan-Kazakhstan border. Now, all these circles, that's where they settled, particularly in this region, in the square, right? And the current population, the Dongan population, is about 160,000, right? Most of them are in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. There are 6,000 in Tajikistan, and even some in Mongolia and Uzbekistan. A few years ago, some of them moved to Russia near the Volga River to do farming. And Dongan is a very interesting case because it's both the old and the new. Much of the old has been kept, which is no longer seen in China. So you can consider Dongan as a sort of a living fossil, right? Some examples are the cuisine, the wedding, and they also have words from the late Qing dynasty that are no longer used in China. But there's also pervasive infusion from the new environment. Their personal names, for example, and there are many loanwords from Russian, Arabic, Persian, and Turkic languages that are spoken in Central Asia. One example is to drive a car. They say yao machina. So yao is the Chinese word, the old-fashioned Chinese word for driving a horse-drawn carriage. Machina is the Russian word for car. So here is a combination of Dongan and Russian. And a minority among minorities, the Dongan cuisine has had a disproportionate influence in Central Asia, So you can see here part of a bilingual menu in Dongan and Russian with various meat dishes. And every dish ends with zhou, which means meat, right? And one of the dishes, the fourth one down the menu, is mushi zhou. On the left is the picture, the best mushi zhou I ever had, actually. And here is if you ask anybody, their favorite food is a lakman, yeah. And here, it's a linguistic potpourri. So you have Russian zhareni, which means fry, lakman, which is Uyghur, and then Tsomia, which is Dungan. Right? So 3 languages in the name of one dish. And fengqiaozi, which is bean noodles. And here also you have a combination of Dungan and Russian. Russian is Gavyadny I ovishmi. Yeah. And interestingly, a Kyrgyz friend, when I asked her whether she knew about the origin of fengqiaozi, she said that she doesn't, right? So I guess she's not alone in this, right? So they take it for granted that it's a it's a Kyrgyz food, but actually it is Chinese originally. And one of the proudest Dungan tradition is their wedding. So here you have a very elaborate hair style. It's called yanzitou, swallow hair. And also they have acquired some new things. For example, Miss Dungan, this Miss Dungan event. Yeah, I don't know whether it's from Western or Russian influence. And the Dungan names have been Russified and Islamized, right? And you can see the first line here, it's the Russian structure for personal names. It has 3 parts: given name, followed by father's name, and the last name. And then this is an example here on the 3rd line here. You can see the Islamic influence here and also the Russian influence, Vich and Nov, right? And there have been various valiant efforts to preserve Dungan culture and language. I'm going to give you some examples. For example, the newspaper 10月底期, October banner, has been replaced by 回民报, which means Dungan paper, right? And here, the red line here, near the top, is a folk saying, 三人合一心，黄土变成金. So 3 people, 1 mind, and earth turns to gold, right? Now this is still being published. And then there's a radio program, a very long standing radio program, 回民声音, yeah, Dungan Voice, which is still broadcast every Monday from 8:40 to 9 on FM 106.9. And I recorded 27 of them. So in case anybody is interested, there are also samples here at this website, web link. And they also have this web presence. Yeah, this is the website for the Kyrgyzstan Dungan Association. And it's in Russian and Dungan. One of the pages is this, yeah. It's an oil painting depicting their journey from China to Central Asia, crossing the Tian Shan Mountain, right? And the underlying words here is 永不能忘, 永不能忘, never forget, right? So, and this whole passage actually is written in Dungan, yeah. It looks like Russian, but it's actually Dungan, yeah. There's also a website for the Kazakhstan Dungan Association, and the link is here. And it seems to have a connection with New Silk Road, a joint China-Kazakhstan publication. So here is Novi Shevkovi Pust, that's a new Silk Road. Right? And on the social media, there's this Huizu Bao, ethnic Dungan paper, on both Facebook and Instagram by Rahima Ismailova, yeah, who was a senior researcher at the Dungan Institute. And here you can see their strong desire to preserve the language, right? So the banner here says, 没有语言,没有民族, so no language, no nationality. And on the right here is the most senior researcher at the Dungan Institute, Imazov. I only met him once because he was in poor health, so, but I interacted with his daughter, which is Rahima Ismailova, quite a lot. She has been a great help. Now, recently, or in the last 20 years or so, there have been more interactions with China. There was more media report, right? Also more trade relations, right? Many Dungans become sort of middlemen, right? Because of their language ability. And many Dungan students study in China on scholarships, on Chinese government scholarships. And also there has been more active Dungan research in China. Now, there are a few Dungan linguistic issues. First of all, given the fact that it preserved many of the old features of the Chinese, these Northwestern Chinese dialects, then the history of Dungan is very worth researching. Also, the evolution after it came to Central Asia, right, due to language contact. So a question to ask is whether it's still a dialect of Chinese or a separate language. I think it depends on who you ask. If you ask Dungans, they will say it's a separate language, yeah, because of the drastic differences now especially in vocabulary, right? And also, since this is a very variety spoken by relatively few people, so and there's a real possibility of its, dying out. So preservation and documentation is foremost on our minds, right? And lastly, the Dungan writing is really a test case for alphabetization of Chinese, yeah, because they didn't use, they have not used Chinese characters, but alphabetic writing, right? And there is a very well-known book by De Francis, who considers all writing to be visible speech. So if you think that, then can Chinese also be written phonetically? And the book cover here is very interesting, right? This is the first, you have the sound wave, and then you have 407 years ago written in various different scripts, including Chinese, right? All of these trying to copy the sound of 407 years ago. Now, so when Dungans first started to write a language, they used the Arabic script, not surprisingly because they were Muslims, right? But it was only used for a short time. And then the Latin script was adopted, but also for a very short time, right? This is a newspaper, Dong Huoxing, yeah, Eastern Spark, yeah. So here you see Russian mixed with Dungan, right? So Yanvar is January in Russian, so January 27. 1936年, nian is Dungan, right? Which means year, right? And you can see that this doesn't look like regular Latin script because they have some modifications for sounds that don't exist in regular Latin script. Yeah. So, but right now, since 1954, the Cyrillic, the Russian script has been used, right? So this is a picture of 10月的期, October banner. And here again, you see Yan, yeah, in Dungan, right? Which means year. 正月, interestingly, does not mean what it means in Chinese anymore. 正月 just January, yeah. And then Sheshanbe it's actually a Persian word meaning Tuesday. So here, even just for day, you have 3 languages, yeah. And this is a very interesting example of one script, same script, yeah, Cyrillic based script for 3 unrelated languages, Kyrgyz, Russian, and Dungan. Right? Kyrgyz is a Turkic language, Russian is an Indo-European language, and Dungan is a Sinic language, right? And here is a plaque at the entrance to the museum of Shevadze, the poet Shevadze. Yeah. So it has been my observation that the alphabetic script has been less than successful. Few people can read it, and not many are motivated to learn. So is this the death knell for alphabetization of Chinese? I don't think so, because among other reasons, the lack of success may be due to the less than optimal design. So these Dungan early designers of Dungan script were not very sophisticated, I think. Also, they may have been influenced by Russian. So there's odd spacing, for example, the subject and the verb grouped together, and no tone marks. That's very, very unfortunate, yeah. So the bottom line about alphabetization of Chinese, since speech is phonetic, we really don't speak in characters. Phonetic writing should be viable as long as we capture all aspects of speech, including tones. So here is an example of the modified script with tones, and it's by a collaboration between the Dungan language teacher Svarova Yusurovna and the German, the late German scholar Rehorn. In their version, they do have tone marks, right? But interestingly, she's not using this in her own classes. I think over there, everything is standardized, right? So you have to get the approval of the Ministry of Education or the higher authorities to implement this newer version. But I think it's great if they can add tone marks to the script. Now, there have been some recent developments in Dungan research. First of all, a few years ago, the first Dungan English dictionary was published by Olli Sami, a Finnish Chinese dialectologist. Towards the end of the Cultural Revolution, he came to China to study in Beijing University, and then did field work in Linxian, Henan. It's interesting guy. I never met him. And also a few years ago, the first Dungan corpus, which is a searchable text collection, was created by Xibei Shifan Daxue in Lanzhou. And here's the link. Yeah, the corpus is still quite small, but I think it will be getting larger and larger. And here you can search for the searched keyword here. Display is Dungan. Yeah. And there's also a fairly sizable additional resource archives in Oslo, University of Oslo. Yeah, you can see that you can sort these papers by in different ways, chronologically, alphabetically, thematically, and so on, right? And the person behind this is Ivo Spira, who is amazing. Yeah, he's a Norwegian linguist and polyglot, speaking more than a dozen languages. Yeah, including Chinese, Dungan, and Russian, and German, and so on, and Finnish, and Norwegian, right? And this one, I found out a few years ago that the Institute for Bible Translation in Moscow has developed this very large collection of Bible stories in the Dungan language. And also you have every story has the script and also the audio recording, and it's free for download. So if you are interested in hearing Dungan and seeing how it is, do I have the link here? But you don't have to. You just search for it. Yeah, search for this. Okay, and then 9 years ago, the first international symposium on Dungan was held in Tokmak. There are some European scholars, American, UPenn, professor from UPenn, Victor Mayer is here, and Chinese teacher at the International University of Central Asia, they are here, and so on. Basically, it's a very small conference, right? Because it's a very small field. Oh, by the way, on the very left here is the president, John Clark of the International University of Central Asia. And the 6th International Symposium on Donggan was held in Lanzhou last year in June, about this time. And I couldn't go there, so I attended virtually together with my colleagues from the Donggan Institute at the Kyrgyz Academy of Sciences. My presentation is titled Tone Changes, Variant Tones and Word Tones. And there was a special separate session for the Donggan scholars from Kyrgyzstan because they don't feel comfortable speaking in Chinese, right? So it was Russian-only session. Now, a few words about my research. I have some observations about tones and stress in Donggan. First of all, there's this very curious phenomenon of variant tones. Now, the highlighted syllable is ren, right, which means person. So woman is nu ren. And then man is nan ren, right? So you can see that the tone for ren is different, right? And this is, of course, not isolated. And there are many tone changes too, like in other Chinese dialects, but most of them are not phonetically accountable, right? One more issue is whether Donggan has word stress. Now, on this, the Chinese scholars differ from Donggan scholars. Chinese scholars tend to say no, apart from this loss of stress for a few words, then by and large, Chinese is not a feature of Chinese language to have word stress. But Donggan scholars, probably influenced by Russian, tend to believe that there is stress in Donggan, right? So this is interesting. So depending on your past experience and so on, you may actually have very different views. My hypothesis is that Donggan may have lexically idiosyncratic word tones instead of syllable tones, unlike most Chinese dialects. And also, Donggan may be transitioning to a stress language similar to what's happening in Shanghai. Yeah, quite many years ago, I studied Shanghai and then found out that it's more like a stress language or pitch accent language than the tonal language. Now, here I'm not going to play them. There are 4 clips here, 3 in Chinese and the last one in Russian. You can get a feel of, how they live and how Donggan sounds like. Right? Now, let's start the second part, pages from my Central Asian diary from September 2021 to June 2022. So, not long after I arrived in Bishkek, I was invited to a wedding. And what I observed is that the guests are multi-ethnic. So you have Uzbeks, Dongans, and then Kyrgyz. And the foods are also very diverse. You have Donggan, you have also Central Asian foods, for example, horse sausage served on pilaf, right? But the music that was played was either Russian or Western, right? So very interesting. Another interesting fact is that I saw alcohol served outside the banquet hall. I was urged to consume some, but I declined because it was noon. But interestingly, there's no alcohol inside the hall, but there is some outside the hall. And here, the pictures, the bride is here, and on the right, you have an elder praying for the newlyweds. And the bottom left, guests wishing the new couple good wishes in Russian. And interestingly, they also had this Kahoot online game. Interesting, yeah, that I see used in language classes. And then teaching started in mid-September at the International University of Central Asia in Tokmak, 60 kilometers away from the capital, Bishkek, where I live. So I had to commute, and the view of Tian Shan on my commute never got old. I mean, this amazing view, yeah. So on one side, you have Tian Shan. On the other side, is the True River or Tree River. And then the whole Fulbright group was invited to tour the 11th century Rana Tower near Tokmak and Suyab, which in Chinese is Suiye, which is supposed to be the birthplace of the Tang poet Li Bai. Yeah? That's a theory. It's not really confirmed. But Tokmak definitely is where the Boston Marathon bombers once lived. There is a middle school that they attended. Yeah? They were Churchians, actually, by the birth. And here is one of my English classes at IUCA, and quite a few of my students are Dongans speaking the Shanxi dialect. The other dialect is the Gansu variety. And here in these pictures, only 2 students are not Donggan. Okay, you can guess who are not Donggan. Yeah. Okay, and then in early October, I had my first visit to the Donggan Institute of the Kyrgyz Academy of Sciences. These senior researchers provided much help later on. Yeah, whenever I had a question, I would ask them. But the research conditions there are very not very favorable, right? Even internet access was not, and also they have very outdated computer equipment. Now, October 18th, an interview of me by the editor, reporter, announcer Faya Havaza was aired on the radio program Huiming Shenying, Donggan Voice. She has been also very helpful. And here, in late October, I had a challenging hike in Ala-Acha National Park, south of Bishkek. Yeah, it was very challenging because of the altitude, because of the fresh snow, and because of the treacherous terrain. But it's pristine. I mean, this is unbelievable scenery. And then in mid-November, I visited the Donggan Mosque in Karakol by Lake Iziko. It was built in 1900 by craftsmen from Beijing. And you can see the Chinese characters here on the beam. And there's a large Donggan village, Erdok, nearby. And we chatted with some visiting elders. One insisted that Chinese are Juju, mother's brothers. And here, the next day, we had a memorable yurt stay in the mountain with 4 fellow Fulbrighters. And the camp owner is Uyghur. And it's also a fairly challenging trip up the mountain. Yeah, it's getting late, and also no cell phone signal, and the direction is not clear at all. But we made it. Yeah, and then December 12th, I met with Rashid Yusupov, who is the editor of the magazine Huizu Donggan and director of One Belt, One Road office at the National University of Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, he was a soldier in the Soviet army and actually was in Zhenbaodao when there was the border skirmish between the 2 countries. But he hates the Soviet Union with very strongly. Yeah. But has many good things to say about China. Now, we brought in the new year with, I went with 2 Fulbrighters, Sam and Taylor, to a friend's parents' home by Lake Issyk, which is amazingly big. It's 113 miles long. That is about the distance between San Diego and Los Angeles. Imagine that. Yeah, and also this lake is not frozen in the winter, and it's called the hot lake, but it's not really hot, but there's fish in there too, but it's warmer than, other lakes. It's supposed to be the 2nd largest high mountain lake in the world, okay? And there's my friend's family, and the two Fulbrights here. And then February 17th, I had my first visit to a Donggan class at number 10 school in Tokmak. Unfortunately, only 1 hour of Donggan class is offered a week, and it's only available in Kyrgyzstan. And Kazakhstan doesn't have it. And late February, I visited the largest Donggan school in the largest Donggan settlement in Alexandrovka, which is by the Kyrgyz name is Sokolok, and in Chinese name is Shaohulu. And in March, I paid a visit to Karim Khan, a newly elected members of the parliament in the White House. This is where the government works. And we talked about Donggan language preservation. He's not optimistic. By the way, he's sort of a polyglot too. He speaks Turkish, Kyrgyz, Russian, English, Arabic, and so on, and Chinese. Yeah, very young, in his 40s. Yeah. And March 6th, we celebrated the Russian festival Maslenitsa, which means butter, in Leninskaya. Now, Leninskaya, of course, is related to Lenin, right? Here you see a statue of Lenin on the left, and also there's the ubiquitous war memorial in every former Soviet town, right? And in the middle here, you have the Eastern Orthodox churches, right? And we made Belini, yeah, which is kind of a crepe symbolizing the sun. And on the right, we burned the scarecrow, symbolizing winter. And also later on, we ate pork, which is the only place in Kyrgyzstan you can, because this is a Russian, community, so they eat pork. Late March, we celebrated the Persian New Year Nowruz in the mountains first, right? We had this picnic in the snow, as you can see. And also we made this traditional Persian dessert called sumalak, which is germinated wheat pudding. Yeah, you stir it for many, many hours, outdoors. Yeah. And here, I didn't meet him, but I had a phone conversation with Daurov. His name is Daurov, but he also goes by the Chinese name Husai An Husai. He's the president of the Donggan Association of Kazakhstan. He has been very active in promoting relationship with China. He actually was recently in China. He went everywhere. And he's posting on WeChat all, events that are significant to him. Yeah. And in early April, we visited this memorial park in memory of those who perished in the 1916 uprising, the Great Soviet Purge, and the April 2010 revolution. On November 5th, 1938, 137 people were executed, including the father of Chengiz Aymatov, the most celebrated Kyrgyz writer, and thrown into an abandoned brick kiln. Mid-April, I attended the opening of the exhibit of Khalida Shimova, who was born in Xinjiang, China, and educated in Leningrad's Repin Art Institute. And she can work with many, many different media. Yeah. And May 2nd, I was invited to a post-Ramadan party by Laura, a young English teacher at IUCA. This is Laura in dreadlocks. I actually teased her about it. And her father, late father, was in the middle, was a famous historian. And I saw a kang, a traditional bed, in her apartment. But instead of being heated by fire underneath, it's heated electrically. And the next day, me and some colleagues were invited to a post-Ramadan feast at the home of Sania, assistant to the president of IUCA. And the picture here on the right shows Sania's mother, who is a great chef, and the relatives who came to visit, including one on the right here, the man who is some sort of a champion, a sports champion, yeah, boxing or something like that, yeah. And then May 7th, I joined a tour group to go to Tashrabat, a medieval caravanserai. Caravanserai is where the caravans stay in the Tian Shan near the Chinese border. The drive was about 6 or 7 hours, yeah. And then this is the caravanserai. Yeah, it's rather spacious. It can accommodate a few hundred people, and there are animals all around, so it's very idyllic. Yeah, this is the central sort of the hall in the caravanserai, and with skylights and so on. And on the way, we also toured Koshoy Khogan, the ruins of an ancient fortress on the way back. And our tour guide and also is actually Sergei, the historian, who teaches at the university. He knows a whole lot about Central Asia. He lived in Xinjiang for a while and so on. Very, very knowledgeable, very nice guy. Yeah. And May 18 started a 6-day, 3-city tour of Uzbekistan. So Tashkent, Bukhara, and Samarkand, and all travel within the country was done by high-speed rail. And you can see this is different high-speed train than those seen in China. This is actually Spanish. And here are 2 pictures of train stations in Tashkent and Samarkand. And one thing you will notice is that the names of these train stations are not written in Cyrillic, right? But in Latin instead. So there are signs of the Russification in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. So officially, they should be using the Latin script and not the Cyrillic script. But unofficially, for example, in restaurants, the menus are still written in the Cyrillic script, and people still speak Russian and so on. And this is Bukhara, yeah. It's my first stop. It has an impressive collection of Islamic architecture. Yeah, it's an important stop on the Silk Road. Right? And Samarkand is my next stop. It's filled with madrasas, which are Islamic schools, and royal tombs. And linguistically, it's interesting. Here, even though it's Uzbekistan, most people speak Tajik, which is Indo-European and not Turkic. So officially, a Turkic language, Uzbek, is the standard language, but people speak Tajik instead. Yeah, so that it means that when they first drew the boundary, drew the border, then they didn't consider such factors as language and culture. Here is the capital, the Grand Bazaar in the capital, Tashkent. Yeah, it's actually an indoor bazaar, unlike most of these bazaars that are outdoor. Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, and on the right you see 2 Koreans selling Korean salad. I think carrot, made with carrot. They were the Koreans who were forcefully relocated from Russian Far East by Stalin in 1937. Now, the Koreans in Central Asia are different from the Dongans in 2 ways. First of all, their names have not been Russified, so they still have Kim or Park or what or not. Yeah, so you can easily spot a Korean. But interestingly, they haven't kept their language. So most Koreans there don't speak Korean anymore. They have kept the foods, yeah, and Korean food is appreciated. Yeah, I actually had a colleague, a French teacher at the university, who is also a Central Asian Korean. She doesn't speak a word of Korean. Yeah, she speaks excellent French. Yeah. Okay, so end of May, I flew down to Osh, the 2nd largest city in Kyrgyzstan, but it's near Uzbekistan. So you can expect the culture and the food is more like Uzbekistan. Yeah. The main claim to fame of Osh is the sacred Suleiman II mountain, which is at the midpoint of the Silk Road. On the left, these are the pilgrims. Right? And I had excellent food in in Osh. Yeah, the bread. I forgot what is it called. Yeah, and the salad here with it's a fusion again with Chinese ingredients. Shiitake mushroom and wood ear, and you can guess what the the shashlik or shish kebab here is made of. It's not your usual lamb or beef. It's actually duck breast, right? And it's so long. It's extremely long, very delicious. Yeah. Okay, and then at the beginning of June, after the semester is over, I went to Kazakhstan for 6 days. I visited the capital Almaty and 2 Dongan settlements, Dunganovka in Taraz and Masanchi right across the border from Kyrgyzstan. So you can see the 3 cities, Almaty on the right, Dunganovka on the left, and then Masanchi just to the north of Bishkek. And Professor Zofia Dungan herself at Nahor's University in Almaty arranged the visits. So Dunganovka actually is where she came from. So I visited her family there, her siblings. And this is when I first arrived in Almaty, I was so impressed by the scenery. Yeah, it's beautiful, right? The lake and the snow-capped mountain is the former capital of Kazakhstan. And this is the famous Russian Orthodox church in the Pamfilov Park. And then I took the night train from Almaty to Dunganovka in Taraz. The train ride was about 10 hours. And I had the upper bunk, which was a challenge to climb up. Right? But I had some interesting, fellow travelers. A Kazakh who was going to Boston for graduate school, a Russian woman, and also a Japanese girl who is traveling all over the world, a backpacker. Yeah, she also studied English in La Jolla many years ago. She got COVID in Thailand, but that didn't deter her. Right, I really admire her guts. Yeah, this is actually a very slow train, as you can see, old style. Yeah. And then near Dunganovka is the site of the Battle of Taraz. Now it's spelled either with an S or Z, depending on whether it's in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan. In Kyrgyzstan it's S, but Kazakhstan is Z, but I think it's in the general area. In Chinese, it's called Dalosi. Yeah. Now, the battle of Taraz is between Arabs and the Tang troops, right? And Tang was defeated, and that actually had a repercussion for many years afterwards. And here's a picture of the Taraz River. The only thing I can see there. I mean, no signs of the battlefield. Here I visited 2 brothers of Professor Zofia. So on the right here is one of Professor Zofia's brothers-in-law, who is Park Uzbek and Park Dungan. And he ate with his hand, yeah, the cloth. And then below you have this one in black is a brother-in-law, a dentist, yeah, who drives a Honda CR-V. And here on the right is one of the brothers who drove me around in the beat-up Muscovicci. It's a very old car, yeah. And one thing that caught my attention is that no women folk came to eat with us, yeah. Both here and later on in Masanchi. So the culture there is still rather conservative, yeah. And this is a surprise. I had known about this Lachman House in New York for a long time. I even show YouTube video about the restaurant to my students. And then I was told that they were in town. So there was a very nice surprise meeting at their home. Actually, not their home, I think the woman's sister's home, right? But unfortunately, the restaurant was recently closed. Yeah, I don't know why, but you can still see the YouTube video about the restaurant. It's in Russian, yeah, and English, yeah, because the children speak English. And then I went to Masanchi from Dunganovka by a taxi, which took me 5 hours, a long taxi ride, the longest taxi ride in my life. Yeah. So Masanchi is right across the border from Kyrgyzstan, and is the site of a bloody ethnic conflict in February 2020. 10 Dungans and 1 Kazakh died, and there was huge property damage, and people are still seeking legal action against the perpetrators of this event. And then the Dungan Museum Director, Musa Lodge, welcomed me with a midnight feast. It's about 12 o'clock at night when I arrived. And I stayed one night at his home. Right? His son had a degree, undergraduate degree from Lanzhou, China, speaks excellent Chinese. But of course, he speaks, Shanxi, the Shanxi variety of Dungan. And then the next day, Musa arranged a meeting with the poet teacher, Zhinirov Hasanovich, who is seen here on the right. And that's his collection of poetry. And then Musa took me to the house of this Dungan elder who has encyclopedic knowledge of Dungan culture. So for about half an hour or so, she recited many folk tales for me, and I recorded some of them. And here is the last trip in Kyrgyzstan to this high mountain lake, Songku Lake. The elevation is 3,000, right? So that's about 10,000 feet, right? And I stayed in the yurt again. I mean, this is, it's about this time of year, right? But you can still see it's very cold there. Yeah, you have to have a stove in the yurt to keep you warm, right? Okay, well, it's time to say goodbye. July 6th, I left Kyrgyzstan to come back to the US, and this is a picture I took at the Manas International Airport. I don't know her. She may be a French traveler there. Yeah. So anyway, that's my my talk, and thank you for coming. And I wonder if there's time for questions.
Professor, I want to thank you. This is Bob Stein again. I want to thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. And I think I'm probably speaking for a bunch of people in saying that this was the first lecture I've had by a linguist in my career, and I really found it to be very enjoyable. I did in my youth know the mother and father of Noam Chomsky, but that's it. That's the closest I ever came to a linguist. And I found this fascinating. I want to point out to the listeners that, and I think you'll agree, that the Dungan language and the Dungan people are a distinct minority in Kyrgyzstan, that 75% of the people, I think, are Kyrgyz themselves, and Dungan is, what, a couple percent. But I was fascinated by your linguistic knowledge, and I want to ask you, what is a stress language?
Okay, so English is a stress language. For example, record versus record, right? So you can use stress to distinguish the meaning and parts of speech. So record is a verb, right? Recording something, right? But record is a noun, right? With the stress on the first syllable. Record, the stress is on the second syllable. Russian is a stress language. So, and it's very important in Russian to have the stress at the right place. Yeah. Now, Chinese, by and large, is not a stress language, with the exception of some words that lose their tones. For example, kuaizi, chopsticks, right? The second syllable doesn't have stress, but that's sort of exceptional. But most Chinese words do not have a clear sort of stress pattern, right? But Dongans, however, seems to me to be developing towards becoming a stress language. Maybe it's reanalyzed from because of the tonal situation, the evolution of the tones, and so it may be alternative way of looking at the phonology of Donggan. Yeah, instead of a tonal language, maybe it's more like a stress language, which is like Shanghai. Quite a few years ago, I proposed that Shanghai may be developing that way as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So, of course, in English, for English speakers, the stresses are just a given, and we understand where the stress goes from the context of the writing, and so it's apparent to an English speaker. We don't even think about it. Jeff Jeff Trace is I'm sure fascinated by your talk as well, and he's the discussant now. So I think it would be appropriate for us to have him speak, and then when that's finished, we'll take more questions from the audience, which I'm sure will be plentiful. Somebody did ask about why dozens of people were killed in the 1930s by Stalin, and the answer, of course, is Stalin was an indiscriminate killer. He killed people in the tens of millions, and terror was his driving force to keep the country together. But Jeff, I'm sure you were fascinated by Professor Zhang's talk. Would you like to chat for a while?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Bob. So I was asked to be discussant because of my experience in China, and I was asked to discuss my experiences with Muslims and Central Asians. And I taught English and business in China for 7 years, and 4 of those years were in Guilin. And in Guilin, in the university I taught at, which was Guilin Ligong Dashui, we had a Chinese language school, and they allowed the foreign teachers to take courses there during our free time. So I took Chinese language with the students there, and the largest contingents of students were Central Asians and then Africans, and I got to know a lot of the Central Asians. I didn't know who Dungan people were at that time, and if I had known, I could have asked some of my friends there if they were indeed Dungan. I know that there were Tajik students there because I have a video in my presentation, if someone has that there, that shows an act they're doing. And so that was, and also I traveled to Xinjiang, and I met, I traveled mainly with Chinese people. In fact, the bus tour was all Chinese, and my traveling companion was Chinese. But we stayed in Urumqi, and I met Uyghur people there, and they were very friendly, and I have a picture of myself with them. I guess, are we going to show my slides or?
Yes. Muting, do you have Jeff's slides?
I don't have his slides, so can you share from your computer?
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay, you can share.
There. Okay. Well, I'll start out with, can you see this okay? Or is this better?
Yeah, we can see it well. If you, there we go, perfect.
Okay. This ties in with Professor Zhang's talk. My talk next month is on Xuanzang, and Xuanzang traveled to Taras, and he wrote something in his famous record of the Western regions, and he entitled it Lonely Little Town, or actually Little Lonely Town, Xiao Zhu Chang. And this is actually what he wrote here. And I did a Google translation of it. This is the actual sort of proper translation from an English version of the book, but this one's actually more interesting. It says, there is a small isolated city more than 10 miles southward with more than 300 households, originally Chinese, who were plundered by the Turks in the past and later gathered together with the same country to protect the city and live in the middle house. The clothes are gone, meaning the Chinese clothes, so they are the same as the Turks, and the words are well-mannered and they still remain in their own country. That's a machine translation, and the translation here is they adopted the costume and etiquette of the Turks, but retained the language and ways of life of their own country. Now, the book I got it from actually said that Xuanzang, which this was in the 7th century, he was referring to the Dungan people. Now, I understand from Professor Zhang and also a little research I did that, you know, the Dungans, they actually they left China in 1878, and this is more than 1,000 years before that. But there were people there at Taras, where Professor Zhang went, that were from China and were Chinese, and they'd been there at least since the 7th century, according to Xuanzang. And Xuanzang is an extremely reliable source of information. And these are actually his words. I finally found an online version of the record of the Western regions by Xuanzang. He was asked to write that by Emperor Taizong. And I don't know if does this look like Tang writing, or it's obviously in simplified Chinese characters, but it's interesting. I don't know. I'd actually be interested in knowing that from Professor Zhang. But let's see. How do I?
Well,
I thought you were going to be doing my slides for me. I'm trying to. Oh,
yeah, it's
right.
classical Chinese. So the classical Chinese was used for 2,000 years. So the Tang variety would not be any significantly different. So
okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. But anyway, Xuanzang, the route he took, he actually went by the lake that you mentioned in your presentation, Issyk-Kul, the warm lake, and he has a very vivid description of it. And that was right after he had passed a terrible mountain pass that most of his party were actually killed, but he ended up finally safe at Issyk-Kul. And then he traveled west and then ended up near Taras, and then south, sort of southwest from there. All right, so this is from a picture I took from a trip I took to Xinjiang, and this is actually in Turpan or Turfan or Tulufan, however you want to say it, depending on the language. And we were stopping, and when in China, when you take a bus tour, you always stop at places where they want you to buy things, and this was a place that sold raisins, and so she came out and danced for us. It was very, very enjoyable. And I was speaking of the Uyghurs that I had met in Urumqi, and so here they are. I'm not sure why we ended up talking. Obviously, I wasn't talking to them. I was talking through my friend Fangzi, and they wanted a picture taken. So one of them took my tablet and took that picture. These are two of the students that I studied Chinese with. And it's interesting now that the boy here, to me, he looks 100% Russian. I don't know for sure, but he looks Russian. And the T-shirt, that's a Tajik, from the Tajik flag. Now this girl here, she spoke excellent English, Russian, and her own language, whatever it was. I had some memory that she was from Kazakhstan, but maybe she was from Tajikistan. I don't know. I wish I had been more interested in the Central Asian republics at that time when I was there. This was 10 years ago. But we were on a field trip or a weekend trip to Longshan rice terraces near Guilin. So here's just something from the school. This was one of the Central Asians. There again, I don't know if he's Tajik or not. His English name was Eddie. He didn't speak much English, but he did end up catching a cobra outside the foreign students' dorm. And these are some pictures of a video. I wasn't actually there, but I got the video of it. And he was actually bitten by the cobra. He had to be taken to a hospital, and he was turned away by 2 hospitals. Finally, the 3rd one took him, and he survived. So here's, well, I won't do that. This is, you mentioned some language, Professor, or mentioned some music, and so I'll play, this is from the International Students Variety Show, and this is the Tajik group, and it's very lively music, and I'll play a little bit of it.
I don't hear the sound.
Jeff, you may need to stop screen share and adjust your share settings to allow people to hear the audio of the video, if that's the intention.
Hmm. Yes, Jeff cannot hear us anymore.
So that's, I guess that sort of concludes my talk. This was actually my first slide, but I've already discussed my visit to Xinjiang. And also, actually, my very first experience with Central Asians in China was Uyghurs would sell, they were selling pastries on the street in Guilin, and I didn't really know who they were. I was with a Chinese friend, a student, and he told me who they were and how I should behave with them. And then, of course, I went to Muslim restaurants in Guilin, well, one in particular, and they're excellent. I enjoyed looking at the slides of food from Professor Zhang. It brought back good memories. So that concludes my comments, and I did enjoy your discussion, Professor Zhang, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Professor,